Mirror Force is a normal trap that can negate an opponent's attack and destroy all their attack position monsters. So why did it get banned? Mirror Force is a very old card that was game warping throughout most of its existence. Because it was both a reactionary and one-sided board wipe, it would often swing entire games off of its activation. It was so dangerous that many players would opt out of lethal lines simply because they would lose to Mirror Force. It fundamentally changed how you have to approach the game and attacking in general, since unlike Sakuretsu armor, this one would wipe your board. It was banned in 2004 on Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever ban list, and it would be limited in 2005, banned 6 months later, limited 6 months after that, and would stay at 1 for 6 years before going to 2 in 2012 and 3 in 2014. So what happened? Mirror Force, and by extension battle traps in general, really haven't aged well. The fact they have to sit on the field until the opponent is ready to attack means that they have ample time to remove it or negate it. Battle traps haven't been good for almost 10 years now, and it's unlikely that will change. Yata-Garasu is a level 2 spirit monster that has a normal restriction of not being able to be special summoned and bounces itself during the end phase, and if it deals battle damage, it skips the opponent's next draw phase. So why did it get banned? Yata's a very old card released all the way back in 2003. On release, it was nothing more than a gimmicky win condition, since if you were in a position where Yata could deal battle damage, you were probably in a winning position and Yata could easily lock up the game. The problem was that this was just way worse than playing better monsters. However, with the release of Invasion of Chaos, and specifically Chaos Emperor Dragon, Yata will become one of the most infamous cards ever. It could always lock up games, but it needed a clear board and most importantly a clear hand. Chaos Emperor Dragon did both of these effortlessly. With a Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest on field, you could summon CED, nuke everything, search for Yata, normal it, and your opponent would have to sit through a very slow and painful defeat, 200 damage at a time. It would be banned in 2004 on the first ever ban list and wouldn't go back to 3 until 2023. So what happened? Yata was never a good card. It only ever got broken because CED existed. Without it, the card is terrible and would have been bad if it was unbanned in 2006, let alone 2023. Engage is a normal spell that can only be activated while you have no monsters in your main monster zone. It has a Sky Striker card from deck to hand, and if you have 3 spells in grave, it draws you a card, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Sky Striker was a very powerful deck on release back in 2018. It was a much slower, more control-oriented deck amongst a sea of combo decks. It had a whole host of versatile spells that could adapt to the current situation, and this was all possible because of Engage. Who would have guessed that a non-once per turn rotor that can also just be Pot of Greed would be busted? Engage was also useful as a part of a mini engine in other decks. Engage lets you add Hornet Drones, which summons a token, link the token into Kagari, add back Hornet Drones, make another token, and now you had 2 free bodies that can be turned into many different things. It would be banned in 2020 to end Sky Striker's 2-year-long reign as competitive deck. So what happened? Sky Striker got super power crept. The game is sped up to a point where Sky Striker decks just aren't able to accrue enough advantage when compared to modern decks. Sky Striker has gotten new support and is a decent rogue deck currently. The cards are still individually powerful though. They saw meta success earlier this year in some Malice decks and are expected to be good with the upcoming Yummy archetype. This is a case where a card was unbanned at the right time and it fits right in with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Thunder Dragon Colossus is a fusion monster that was always summoned by its alternative condition of tributing a Thunder monster, provided a Thunder monster's effect was activated in the hand that turn. It stopped your opponent from adding cards from their deck to the hand except by drawing, and you could banish Thunder from grave to protect itself from being destroyed. So why did it get banned? Colossus was and still is a very powerful floodgate. Being draw and lockboard on an indestructible body was crazy. During toss format, Colossus was a house. It was a great floodgate for any of the non-Orcust decks of the time and was very difficult to out as well. It got even more disgusting combined with other engines like Crusadia and Gardrag. Colossus will be banned in 2020, would stay there for 4 years before getting unlimited in 2024. So what happened? Colossus' effect has not been power crept. Droll is still a staple to this day. The problem is that it's only usable going first, since it's just an endboard piece, and that there isn't a good way to summon it. Thunder Dragons have been severely power crept for years now, and Colossus doesn't change that. While yes, it can be summoned generically with Nemesis Corridor, which can be searched off Cupid Pitch, if you got to this point, you've already won. Miragestallio is a generic rank 3 that can detach a special as Salamangreat from deck, but locks you into only using fire monsters' effects. And if it's sent to grave as material for a Salamangreat Link monster, you get to bounce a monster. So why did it get banned? Salamangreat was a powerful mid-range deck that saw play around 2019 with the release of their structure deck. It was a very low to the ground deck that was able to make weaker but very consistent boards every turn, often backed up by hand traps. Stallia was integral to all of Salamangreat's combos since it could summon whatever you needed from deck, potentially break boards going second with its bounce, and could be made off a single Gazelle. Stallia was banned alongside Engage, Colossus, and Harp Horror to mark the end of toss format and to cycle out the deck that had dominated for the last year. So what happened? Salamangreat has fully been eclipsed by much stronger decks, and Negate and follow-up just isn't enough anymore, and its consistency is no longer a unique asset since all decks are built to be hyper-consistent. Who would have guessed the 6-year-old deck wouldn't be able to keep up? Harp is a dark machine that can be banished from grave to summon an Orcust from deck, then locks you into darks. So why did it get banned? Don't let that short effect fool you. This card was incredibly strong. Orcust was a deck that was very hard to stop once it got its engine rolling, and Harp was very crucial for this. Because of lore, Harp is able to be sent to grave of Orcust Nightmare, which is able to be summoned by Nightmare Mermaid, which is able to be summoned using any Nightmare, which are able to be summoned with any 2 monsters. Because of this, Orcust actually found success as an engine in other decks, and Harp's ability to condense several cards into itself was very valuable. It was nice to have Harp pull triple duty of giving a body, a banished Orcust name, and access to either symbol or Nightmare. Harp will be banned in 2020 to end toss format, and wouldn't be unbanned until 2024. So what happened? A combination of Orcust getting power crept and Konami making new Orcust support led to Harp's unban. Prior to the new support, Orcust was an okay engine to play in mid-range and control decks, but after the support, it became a top contender again. As of writing, Orcust has won the North America World Championship qualifier, which is a big deal. It's seeing success alongside Mitsurugi, Azamina, and Fiendsmith, and overall is a very healthy deck. Thousand Eyes is a fusion monster whose material never matters since it was always shielded out by Metamorphosis or Instant Fusion. It stops all other monsters from changing their battle positions and attacking, and can equip a monster your opponent controls to itself to gain its stats and destruction protection. So why did it get get banned? Thousand Eyes Restrict was a staple in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Its ability to lock down the field was very powerful in a world where combat was important. It being a level 1 monster meant that Metamorphosis could easily cheat it out by simply tributing a goat token, which was very common in goat format. It would eventually be banned because it slowed every game down to a crawl and wouldn't come back until 2016, 10 years later. While Metamorphosis was now banned, Instant Fusion now existed, and Thousand Eyes saw a stint of play as an Instant Fusion target. The fact that it attached monsters to itself let it bypass protections. So what happened? Thousand Eyes' effects just don't hold up. Stopping attacks isn't that important, its attached not being a quick effect also really hurts. This card had its time in the spotlight, got a bit of a comeback, but now gets to sit in the retirement home with all of his other goat buddies. Ring of Destruction is a normal trap that pops a monster that burns both players equal to the attack of the monster. So why did it get banned? Ring was the premier removal card for the entirety of the DM and GX era. It was the only quick effect removal with no real downside. The burn, despite it being reciprocal, was mostly positive. It meant you could clean up games by popping your opponent's biggest monster while they were low, or popping your own monsters after you attack to double up on damage. One more thing is that because Ring damaged both players at the same time, it was very easy to force draws with this card. This would get the card limited only a month after release. It would stay at 1 for 2 years before getting banned in 2005. It would come back in 2006 and will get banned again exactly 1 year later in 2007. So what happened? Ring was unfortunately the recipient of a crippling errata back in 2015. Basically, you can't game your opponent unless their life is equal to the attack of the destroyed monster. You can only target your opponent's monsters, and you take the damage first, so there's no draws. I get the idea behind these changes. You don't want to force draws, and being able to burn for a huge amount of damage by popping your own monster was a fine change, but this is just a different card. It's all little play when it came back because it is still generic removal with no real cost, but by this point there were just better cards to play. Chaos Emperor Dragon can be summoned by banishing a light and dark from grave, and you can pay 1,000 life points and send all cards from both players' hand and field to grave, and your opponent takes 300 damage for each of their cards sent. So why did it get banned? I think reading the effect is enough to tell you why it got banned, but if you didn't figure it out, a full board wipe and hand rip is a little broken, but the Yata lock is what made this card truly unbeatable. If you had Sangan or Witch of the Black Forest on the field and used Emperor Dragon's effect, you could search Yata-Garasu, normal it, then attack your opponent. They would skip their draw phase due to Yata's effect, and since they have no cards in hand and have no way to get more, they lose. This is what would turn the limited list into the forbidden and limited list. Lots of old cards weren't well tested, and Konami needed to have a way to fix this, banning Emperor Dragon 5 months after print. So what happened? ZED got an errata that actually doesn't change the effect. It's still a full board and hand wipe. However, they gave it a stipulation that you can't activate other cards that turn use the effect. This errata obviously makes it unplayable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is just sad. Let the guy who created the ban list stay there forever, not whatever this is. Both of these cards have similar effects. They both add any monster with 7 field to grave. Sangan searches anything with 1500 or less attack, and Witch searches anything with 1500 or less defense. So why'd they get banned? Sangan and Witch are old school staples that were played in pretty much everything. They acted as generic recruiters that triggered when destroy card effects or were tributed for a tribute summon. They would be so ubiquitous they would both be quickly restricted. They would stay at 1 for a while until Yata-Garasu and Chaos Emperor Dragon started locking people out of drawing, and these two were able to facilitate it. They would both be banned on the first ever ban list in 2004, and while Witch would be stuck there until 2017, Sangan got out in 2005. Sangan would be banned in 2013 for its use in Dino Rabbit and Wind Up, though he would eventually be unbanned in 2017, a few months before Witch. So what happened? They both received an errata. However, these erratas aren't actually that bad. They were given once per turn restrictions, and you can't activate the effects of the monster you search until the end of the turn. Witch hasn't seen much play since the errata, but Sangan was actually played in Crusadia for a bit. Since those monsters can inherently summon themselves, they get around Sangan's restrictions. Honestly, the existence of Almirage and Artemis means these two could see play again. They're both full yummy combo. Stratos is a wind warrior that on summon can either add a hero monster or pop back row up to the amount of other heroes you control, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Stratos was a 2015 card released in 2007. This was a time where the fact that Stratos was a +1 was a huge deal, especially during a time when gadgets were being played just because they were +1s. Now you get to do that but search a monster with a real effect. Fun fact, because the TCG and OCG had a shared ban list at the time, Stratos would actually be released limited since it was already limited in the OCG, meaning Stratos would have been at 3 for the first time in 2019. Small correction, Stratos was a Shonen Jump promo card that officially released in April 2007, and Stratos was limited in March 2007. However, some players had access to the manga as early as February, meaning that if you somehow had the means, you could play 3 copies of Stratos for a few weeks, and some players actually did for the one SJC that was held at the time. Regardless, this card would see play in every deck that played heroes: Perfect Circle, DDT, Little City, Hero Beat, Diva Hero, and more. It would be banned in 2013 alongside many other staples from the time. It would come to 1 in 2018, 2 in 2019, and then 3 later that year. So what happened? Stratos was just too ahead of its time. Had it come out in 2014 or 15, it would have fit right in alongside other cards like it. It currently sees play in hero decks, though they haven't been nearly as good as they have in the past. The only part of the text that matters is that if you have no back row, you could summon this card from grave during the end phase, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! This card was terrible for years since it's just a worse version of Treeborn Frog. However, in 2018, it would be paired alongside Topologic Bomber Dragon, Trickstar Black Catbat, and the new release Nightmare Cerberus to form a new FTK. You'd have Bomber Dragon in the EMZ with Cerberus co-linked with it and Catbat to gain Cerberus' destruction protection. Then all you needed was Samsara Lotus in grave and move to the end phase. Lotus would reborn to his own Bomber Dragon points to, destroy Lotus, triggering Catbat to burn for 200. Then just repeat until the opponent either scooped or lost. Lotus would be banned in 2018, killing the FTK. So what happened? This FTK was good, but like most FTK FDKs was very interruptible. Back in 2018, Callby was at 3, Magical Midbreaker Field was at 3, Isolde, Pre-Rata Firewall Dragon, and Summon Stork were also legal. Now that all these cards have been hindered in one form or another, FDKs are way harder to pull off. That coupled with hand traps becoming better and more prevalent is why this FDK is allowed to exist. It even has a 1-card combo, but it loses to every hand trap in existence, so it's bad. The big dragon rules all have 3 effects. They can be summoned from hand or grave by banishing 2 dragons and or monsters of their respective attribute. They add a dragon of their attribute when they are banished, and they can be discarded alongside a monster of their attribute to do a unique effect. Notably, each can only use 1 effect per turn. The babies all can discard themselves plus a dragon and or monster with their attribute to summon their respective daddy ruler from the deck. So why'd they get banned? The dragon rulers were way ahead of their time. They could not only spam out big monsters every turn from both the hand and graveyard, they act as some of the best Xyz monsters for the time. They would be so powerful that their first hit, which banned all the babies, would do nothing to stop their dominance. They would continue to be a powerful deck for 7 more months before receiving their second hit, which limited all the daddies. This would finally rein them in for about a year until Dark Matter Dragon came out. This card sends 3 dragons to grave for cost, which mostly meant dumping 3 rulers. This would lead to some insane OTKs for 2015 when we finally banned the rulers. Babies would come back right after the daddies is banned, and they would come back slowly over the next several years. So what happened? Power Creep destroyed these guys. No quick effect, big minuses in hand, the only 1 effect per turn. They did receive new support with Tri-Star Mazes, but the core design is just too old to make anything better than Rogue. Construct is a fusion monster requiring a Shaddoll and a light monster. On summon, it dumps a Shaddoll monster, and when it's sent to grave, it adds back a Shaddoll spell trap. Also, if it battles a special summon monster, it destroys it at the start of the damage step. None of these effects are once per turn. So why did it get banned? Shaddoll was one of the decks released in Duelist Alliance. It was a deck of flip monsters that all had effects and they were sent to grave by a card effect. They also got access to the first fusion spell to use monsters from the deck, if you ignore future fusion. What this means is that if your opponent had a monster summoned from the extra deck, you could use Shaddoll fusion, dump any Shaddoll to do whatever, and any light monster to summon Construct. Construct could then send another Shaddoll monster to do something else, contest whatever monster your opponent had summoned while also being essentially immune to battle, and if the opponent did remove it, they could just add back the Shaddoll fusion and do it again next turn. Shaddoll would be a top deck for about a year before getting Construct banned in 2015. It would go back to 1 in 2019 and up to 3 later that year. So what happened? Construct was banned for way too long. By the time it came off the list, it had been pretty power crept. It would see play in some Invoke Dogmatic as Shaddoll list in 2021, but aside from that, it wouldn't make a huge impact. Its foolish effect and material is its best quality, and if Shaddoll ever gets some new support, expect to see this thing played. Breaker is a dark spellcaster that gets a spell counter on normal summon that gives it 300 attack. You can then remove the spell counter to pop a spell trap. So why did it get banned? Released in 2003, Breaker would be one of the best normal summons in the game. For one, it was decently big, 1600 attack was enough to get over most effect monsters, and if you kept the spell counter, it could trade with any normal summon. And that's what made Breaker so good, its versatility. Cards usually just did one thing, so cards that could be used for multiple purposes were very valuable. Not even mentioning how powerful the effect was too. MST and Heavy Storm were both limited at the time, and Breaker was mostly just MST attached to a body. Breaker would be limited in 2003, banned in 2007, limited later that year, banned in 2008, limited again later that year, then finally unlimited in 2009. So what happened? Cards started doing more. By 2009, there were things like Dark Arm Dragon, Stratos, and Synchros, and MST on a normal summon just wasn't good enough to be banned anymore. Spellbook of Judgement is a quick play spell that does nothing when you use it, but during the end phase, it searches spellbook spells up to the amount of spells you activated during the turn. Then you get to summon a spellcaster with a level less than or equal to the amount of spells used. So why did it get banned? Spellbooks, or the Prophecy archetype, was a powerful control deck from 2013. It had access to a Swiss Army knife of spellbooks that each did different things, but the card to put the whole thing together was Judgment. This was what allowed you to consistently fill your hand for the next turn. It also helped that you could summon Xiaogan from the deck. Notably, this card was released at the same time as the Dragon Rulers and was the only thing stopping them from ever reaching tier 0. It was the only thing that could possibly keep up the sheer amount of advantage that deck could produce. This card will be banned in September 2013, stay banned for 9 years before getting limited in 2022 and unlimited in 2024. So what happened? This card gets you an insane amount of advantage, but there isn't a great way to utilize it, especially now that Xiaogan is banned. Because it happens in the end phase, you likely won't get a chance to use any of the cards you searched. Firewall Dragon is a generic link 4 requiring 2+ monsters, and it could bounce cards equal to the amount of monsters co-linked with it, but the real effect was that if any monster you pointed to was sent to grave, you could summon any monster from your hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! Since Master Rule 4 required links, it was nice to give every deck a boss that could generically help every deck. That was until Spiral Double Helix came out and broke Spiral. This deck could use Firewall's effect to continue spamming monsters to make huge extra link board. Took a bit of a break before coming back with a vengeance in 2018, aka the year of design mistakes. Now that the generic link pool had expanded, combo decks like Goki U-Link took over, but the real problem was Danger Dark World FTK. Basically, you would use the broken links at the time to set up Firewall Dragon, Cannon Soldier, and Grapha with a Dark World in hand. You tribute Grapha to burn with Cannon Soldier, triggering Firewall to summon the Dark World from hand, Grapha bounce the Dark World to reborn, and the cycle repeats until the game is over. This was just one of the FDKs that would lead to the death of Firewall Dragon in 2018. So what happened? Firewall got a errata in 2021 that is actually good. The summon from hand now can only summon a Cybers, and now it's a once per turn. The card did see some play in Malice, but that's about it. The card isn't bad, it's just specific now. Pot of Avarice is a normal spell that shuffles 5 monsters from your grave back into the deck, then draws 2 cards. So why did it get banned? Pot of Avarice was the first of the Pot of Greed retrains. It would actually be released about a month after Pot of Greed's ban. It would see play almost immediately as a staple in most decks. Since games went on for a while, it wasn't too hard to actually resolve this card. The cost severity also depended greatly on the deck you were playing. Some decks could easily fill up the grave with monsters, but most of them wanted those monsters to stay there. However, they played it because the ability to draw 2 on a generic card was just that powerful. It would be all around the list for 8 years before getting banned in 2013. This was around the time Konami tried banning a bunch of the powerful stable cards, and this was one of them. It was stay banned for 7 years before coming back back in 2020. So what happened? This card was banned for way too long, as arguably it wasn't even ban worthy to begin with. Avarice is just way too slow. Some Zodiac decks played it when it came back since it could recycle all your Xyz monsters, but it didn't stick around. Nowadays we have better pot cards, so there really isn't a need to play this card anymore. Sure, it is a monster that can be used at the entire cost for the ritual summon of a Necroz monster. Furthermore, if it's tributed by a card effect, it adds a Warrior Necroz ritual, which is basically any of them. So why did it get banned? Rituals as a mechanic were for the longest time underpowered, to say the least. That is until the release of Necroz. While it wasn't the first playable ritual deck, it was the first to be the best deck of its format, bordering on tier 0 in the TCG. This was because it fixed the biggest issues with rituals: consistency. The ritual monsters all doubled as hand effects, and since the ritual monsters couldn't use copies of themselves as material, Shurt's ability to pay the cost for any of them was very nice. Not only letting you ritual summon for little cost, you also got to search for another monster. Necroz went through several waves of hits before finally Shurt was banned in 2015, ending the 9-month dominance of Necroz. It would be unbanned in 2019. So what happened? Necroz is probably aged the worst out of any tier 0 deck. It has no good quick effects, dies to any form of interruption, and its main strength, its consistency, isn't a big deal anymore. This deck would have likely faded away by 2017 even if Shurt was never hit. Also, they did get new support, but it's not very good. Denglong is a generic level 5 synchro tuner that adds a Yang Zing card on summon, usually 9 pillars, can dump a worm and copy its level, and if it leaves the field, summons a Yang Zing from deck. So why did it get banned? Denglong was a powerful synchro with an uncommon level. Since it could search any Yang Zing card, it made it so any level 5 synchro meant an Omni negate. The deck to take the most advantage of this would be True King Dino. This was a time with 3 Misc, 3 Lithosagem, and 3 Diagram. This led to a very powerful deck that could put up some crazy end boards for the time. Unfortunately, it was playable at the same time as Zodiac, which meant it wouldn't see much representation. That is until the World Championship. Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds has a special ban list that combines both the TCG and OCG ban list, and the 2017 Worlds ban list destroyed Zodiac and allowed for True King Dino to thrive. The deck would go on to win, and like most decks that win Worlds, would be gutted on the next list, banning Denglong. It would be limited in 2023 and unlimited in 2024. So what happened? Denglong requires a ton of bricks. You have to play 9 pillars. Without Chiwen and Beyond, the card loses its potency. Especially now that Ebe is banned, if you want to play a level 5 synchro tuner that requires a brick, just play Ebe. For those watching in another tab or aren't looking at the screen, hi. And I meant to say now that Ib is unbanned. Towers is a level 10 earth machine that cannot be special summoned and requires 3 Cleaves for its tribute summon. Towers is unaffected by spell traps as well as monster effects from a monster with a level or rank less than its own. Special summon monsters lose 500 attack and defense, and once per turn you can force your opponent to send a card from their hand to field to grave. So why did it get banned? When Towers came out in 2014, unaffected monsters were exceptionally rare and hard to summon. There's a reason we call them Towers and not Venomenagas. Because of this, most decks didn't have plans for dealing with monsters like this, especially ones as resilient as Towers. This led to games ending the moment Towers hit the field. Decks like Burn and Kimbest famously struggled to beat cards with more than 2500 attack, and Shaddoll Construct with helpless against a normal summon Towers. The only convincing out was Diamond Crab King, who set its attack to 3000, bypassed Towers restriction, and crash. Unless you lived in Europe where you wouldn't have access to this card until Towers is already banned, which happened in 2015. It wouldn't be unloaded until 2018. So what happened? Master Rule 4 completely destroyed this card. Now the pendulums were significantly worse, it was harder to get the necessary tributes, and link monsters existing meant that most decks sent out Towers without even trying. Cerberus can't destroy Towers. Pretend it's Unicorn instead. Not even mentioning the fact that decks are just more equipped to deal with a card like Towers. Ptolemaeus is a generic rank 4 that needs 2+ force for its summon. It had the relevant effect 2, as a quick effect, attach 3 materials to rank up into any non-number rank 5. So why did it get banned? Tellarknight was a fine rogue deck, and ranking it up into Castellar Diamond was good, but it was by no means ban-worthy. That is until Performapal Pendulum, or PePe. PePe was a deck that quite literally did everything. Every card was a searcher, some even searched more searchers. Mind you, this was 2016, but the pièce de résistance was Ptolemaeus. PePe was very good at spamming material, and Ptolemaeus was very good at using said material. Most often it would rank up into Cyber Dragon Nova, who could then go into the newly released Cyber Dragon Infinity, who, among many things, was an Omni negate. It got so bad that only a few weeks after PePe would reach full power, Konami would completely kill the deck on their only adjusted list, which was pretty much an optional ban list that took the place of the normal ban list. It was weird, and Ptolemaeus would be on the adjusted list before actually getting banned in April 2016. It would stay there for 6 years before getting unbanned in 2022. So what happened? It just takes too much material. Current rank 4 decks could easily make it, they just don't have a need to. There are just way simpler ways to get to a disruption. Tribe-Infecting Virus is a level 4 monster that can discard a card and declare a type of monster, then destroy everything with the declared type, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Board wipes were absolutely broken in old Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially one that could theoretically do it every turn. One thing that is important to mention, from 2012 and earlier, Yu-Gi-Oh! Had what was called Ignition Effect Priority, which basically meant that you could use ignition effects like Tribe here as on-summon effects the turn they're summoned. Let's say my opponent has Bottomless Trap Hole set. If I normal Tribe, I can declare priority, letting me use the effect before my opponent has a chance to use Bottomless, which meant unless you negated the summon, your board was getting nuked. Not to mention it could be searched with Witch of the Black Forest. Tribe will be limited after only a month and will be banned in 2005. It will stay banned for 15 years before coming back to 3 in 2020. So what happened? It was a combination of Ignition Effect Priority being removed and being a board wipe that took both your normal summon and multiple cards in hand being way too much for 2020. Nowadays, with all the board wipes at 3, there isn't a need for this card anymore. Performapal Pendulum, or PePe, was the shortest lived tier 0 deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and I got 4 cards banned: Damage Juggler, Plushfire, Ptolemaeus, and Wavering Eyes, as well as 6 cards limited: Ignister Prominence, Luster Pendulum, Monkey Board, and Skullcrabat Joker. Those last 2 would later on to go be banned. So why'd they get banned? Pendulum had a very strange introduction into Yu-Gi-Oh! With the sole exception of Klee, Pendulum decks were severely underpowered. That is until late 2015 with the release of Perform Mage Plushfire and Skullcrabat Joker. Up to this point, the Perform Mages were just generic extenders that slotted into rank 4 decks, but now their own archetype actually had something to work with. Plushfire got to summon a Perform Mage from deck not once per turn when it's destroyed, something Pendulum decks loved doing, and Joker search any form of POW, which would create a deck that could not only spam out rank 4s like Ptolemaeus and Abyss Dweller, but synchros like Ignister Prominence. The deck was already powerful, but received even more support at the start of 2016. The deck got Monkey Board, who was a scale that searched another scale, Draco Face-Off, who was more consistency, as well as Cyber Dragon Infinity, giving Ptolemaeus something even better to go into. It would be the best deck in the format by a mile, however, it would only be played at one event. Konami would create an adjusted list, which is just a ban list that locals didn't have to abide by, and it would completely cripple the deck. Once the actual ban list came out a few months later, the deck would be completely destroyed. So what happened? Every card is now a 3, and they're all bad. Plushfire became once per turn, Monkey Board isn't special anymore, Damage Juggler's too slow, Wavering Eyes needs too much setup, and Ptolemaeus takes too much investment. Dark Strike Fighter is a generic level 7 synchro that contributes a monster to burn the opponent for 200 times its level, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Surprisingly, not because of FDKs. DSF was released in 2009 and would see play for the same reason Gaga Got Cowboy saw play. You would attack with all your monsters, synchro into DSF, then just tribute your field for game. What made it even crazier was that Dark Strike Fighter could tribute itself, meaning if it attacked, it dealt 4,000 damage alone. Lots of decks would make use of this, Blackwing and Rescue Cat decks mostly, but anything that can make a level 7 synchro benefited from playing it. It made these already aggressive decks unbeatable, so it would be banned only 6 months after release. So what happened? Dark Strike Fighter received one of the most crippling erratas a card could get. First, you could only use the effect once per turn. Makes sense, not sure why it wasn't there before. But the craziest change was that it could only use its effect in main phase 1. This meant you could no longer use it after you battled. The card would have already been bad with the once per turn restriction, but the phase 1-2 was way too much. Trishula is a generic level 9 synchro that needs 3 monsters, 2 tuners and a non-tuner. I mean, it does say it on screen, but for those of you tabbed out, I said it backwards. It's only 1 tuner and 2 non-tuners. On summon, it banishes a card from the opponent's field, grave, and a random one from hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Trishula is one of the most iconic synchro monsters, and that's mostly due to its strength. Despite the fact that it took 3 monsters to make, it would see play in almost every deck that could theoretically make it. Its effect was so powerful because unlike many big synchros where you needed them to stick around for their value, Trish did it all on summon. However, its lack of a once per turn restriction would prove troublesome immediately. Decks like Infernity, TG, and Plants could also have multiple Trishulas to rip multiple cards out of the opponent's hand. This would get the card limited after only a few months, but it wouldn't stay there for long. Even at 1, the same synchro decks would find ways to loop Trishula upwards of 6 times to essentially insta-win, since they would lose their entire hand and field and most of their graveyard. This would get Trishula banned in 2012, though notably well after it was actually meta. It would get a preemptive hit at the start of Master Rule 5, but has now been unlimited since 2022. So what happened? A generic sync with a non-once per turn hand rip is very powerful, it's why Omega is limited, but there's a big difference between 2 material and 3. Decks can loop Trishula, but if you really want a hand loop, there are better cards available that are still rogue at best. Time Steal is a normal trap that skips your opponent's next draw phase. So why did it get banned? Time Steal is probably the worst card to have ever been banned in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you draw immediately at the start of your turn, you have to Time Steal preemptively to actually skip the next turn. And if you were going first, the first turn you'd be able to skip is the opponent's second turn, since there's no chance you could use the card before their first draw phase. In the TCG, this card would see very little play before its ban, and that's because in the OCG, this card was being played in Victory Dragon decks. Basically, they would loop Time Steal and drop off with Mask of Darkness and Tsukiyomi to stall until you could summon Victory Dragon. While it was only okay, it was incredibly toxic. This would get Time Steal banned in the OCG, and since we shared a ban list, it would be banned here too. It would stay banned for 16 years before getting limited in 2022 and unlimited in 2024. So what happened? This card was never really good. It only saw play in 1 deck, and even then it was very fragile. No clue why it was banned for so long. The individual effects of all these monsters don't matter. All that does matter is that Steam the Cloak, Jet Synchron, and Glow Up Ball were all 1-card Huck of Fiber Axes. Destruto was a very searchable tuner that could summon itself from grave, and O-Line was the best target to summon off Hulk since it could summon a token when it left the field, and it was a machine for Auroradon. So why'd they get banned? If you're unaware, Hulk of Fiber Axes was a link monster that took any monster plus a tuner, and it summoned a level 3 or lower tuner from deck. It was also one of the strongest combo enablers of all time. The only issue is that it needed a tuner, and most non-synchro decks didn't have access to them. That's where these guys came in. They summoned Hulk all on their own, and if you instead just summon them off Hulk, they turned a Link 2 into a super easy Link 4 because they replaced themselves in some way, either with themselves or a token. Destruto was different because it wasn't a 1-card Hulk, but it was a generically good card that was very searchable and made Hulk way more accessible. These cards would be picked off in 2020, and most would return shortly after Hulk's ban in 2022, except Glow Up Bulb. That one took a while. So what happened? Aside from Destruto, these cards were just okay by themselves. Since coming back, the only ones to see play were Jet Synchron and Destruto. The real problem was obviously Hulk, and it took Konami a while to figure it out. Lunalight Tiger is a level 4 pendulum monster. It's a level 3. With the pendulum effect, Reborn a Lunalight is a soft once per turn, and a monster effect, Reborn a Lunalight when it's destroyed is a hard once per turn. Fun ruling, because pendulum monsters make perfect sense, if Tiger is popped in the scales, it triggers its monster effect to float. So why did it get banned? Tiger was a very strong enabler for an OTK deck that never was. Aside from a small stint in Zodiac, Lunalight wouldn't see real success until it got a few pieces of additional support. It would be mostly played as an OTK deck that meshed well with other decks like Orcust and Phantom Knights. They also helped summon Azathoth a lot easier. However, they would become a huge problem once Master Rule 4 ended. You see, Lunalight had received many powerful non-once return cards with no locks on them, and now that you didn't need links to summon extra deck monsters, Lunalight was able to spam out lots of bodies that could all be turned into all sorts of degenerate stuff. This card got banned in April 2020, would stay banned for 2 years before getting limited in 2022 and be unlimited by 2024. So what happened? The main reason Tiger isn't broken anymore is because all the stupid Xyz monsters it facilitated are banned now. It currently still sees play in Lunalight, which has been a decent rogue deck for a while now. Eba's a generic level 5 tuner synchro that can use a World Chalice normal monster as a tuner. On summon it adds a World Legacy card, and when it's sent to grave, it summons a World Chalice monster from deck or grave. So why did it get banned? Eba's one of the few synchro monsters who was actually designed with Master Rule 4 in mind. She was meant to be used as a link climbing tool that wouldn't occupy your EMZ for too long. Decks would play Dragonet, which could summon Galaxy Serpent from the deck, which allowed anything to include this little package to instantly make material for a potential Link 4. The deck to mainly use it would be Dragon Link. They would add World Legacy Guard Dragon to Reborn, Link off for a Link 2, summon World Chalice Guard Dragon off Ebe, Link for Striker, Guard Dragon Reborn to summon LP, and from there you could do pretty much anything. This would get the card banned in 2020, it would stay banned for 3 years before fully coming to 3 in 2024. So what happened? Power creep is very real. This thing just takes too many garnets to work. It saw some play in Generator, but that deck was never close to meta. Archetypes just have their own better versions nowadays. Ancient Fairy Dragon is a generic level 7 synchro that can summon a level 4 lower monster from hand and destroy field spells to gain life and add another. Both were soft once per turns. So why did it get banned? AFD was decidedly mid on release. Its summon from hand effect was nice, but no one cared about popping a field spell to search like Sogan. But as field spells became stronger and stronger in the coming years, AFD got stronger with them. It was playable in pretty much any deck that needed a field spell, but by far the biggest buff was release of Destrudo. Destrudo combined with any level 6 or lower monster made any level 7 synchro, and since Destrudo could summon itself from grave, it paired very well with the field spell Dragon Ravine. So you could use Ravine to dump Destrudo, Destrudo Reborn to make AFD, then have AFD pop the Ravine to search any field spell and get a monster out of the hand. This would be played mostly in Spiral, a deck that has a field spell with a soft once per turn search. There were also some really bad FTKs going around, so the card would be banned in May 2018 to stop all of it. So what happened? AFD got errata and is actually not butchered. They just made both effects hard once per turn and stop you from adding the same field spell you pop. It hasn't seen much success yet, but I wouldn't write it off for good. Kirin is a level 6 pendulum monster that, as a quick effect, can bounce both a pendulum monster you control and a monster your opponent controls. Also, it cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. So why did it get banned? Kirin was released back in 2015, and it would take until 2016 for the card to really see play, due to a sort of PePe related problem at the time, but after that was dealt with, Kirin would slot into most pendulum decks. It functioned as both removal when going second as well as an interruption when going first, and since it could bounce itself back every turn, you could keep on pen summoning it for a super sticky piece of removal. If you remember DPE, imagine that but in 2016. It would get limited soon after and would stay there for about a year before getting banned in 2017. It would stay banned for 7 years before coming back to 3 in 2024. So what happened? This card was banned for way too long. Kirin could have probably come back in like 2020 and been bad, but by 2024 there was no hope. Thankfully there's a retrain coming out that is just an upgraded Kirin. D-Mock is a level 8 monster that adds back a spell card and summon, not once per turn. Also, it banishes anything it destroys by battle and banishes itself if it would leave the field. So why did it get banned? D-Mock was released all the way back in 2004 and it was very good. This was still at a point when Magician of Faith was a broken card, so something that could add back spells without needing to wait a turn was incredible. The only issue is that it was a level 8 monster with no built-in summoning condition. This meant it would only see play in decks that could cheat it out, and there were a lot of decks that could do that. Magical Scientist FTK, Reasoning Gate, any deck with Dimension Fusion, and especially Dad decks. Now, not a single one of these decks is aiming to do anything fair. They all use D-Mock to loop their most broken spell over and over again. And while most of the spells it was looping were problems in their own right, Konami decided to ban D-Mock alongside them just in case. It was banned for 8 years before coming back in 2016. So what happened? A bad errata is what happened. Now you only get to add the spell in the end phase on top of a hard once per turn. An effect so slow wouldn't even be good in GOAT format. Without the errata, this card would likely still be banned, but let the boy keep his legacy. Goyo Guardian was a generic level 6 synchro with 2800 attack, and when it destroyed something by battle, you could resummon the monster for yourself in defense position. So why did it get banned? Goyo was arguably the strongest synchro of its era. A level 6 synchro with 2800 attack kind of broke the mechanic out the gate. First off, a level 6 synchro is one of the easiest levels to make. Since level 3 and 4 are the most common levels and most of the good tuners were level 2 or 3, making 6s was very easy. And being able to airdrop a 2800 attack monster out of nowhere was very strong and could threaten pretty much any board. Since 2800 is more attack than most level 8 synchros, its actual effect was good too. It punished setting monster with graveyard effects like Necro Gardener or Vayu, and stealing a Stratos was broken. It would be limited in 2009, then banned in 2011, just because its existence invalidated so many other synchros. It would stay banned for 3 years before getting unbanned in 2014 and unlimited in 2015. So what happened? Goyo being a big beater just wasn't useful by 2014, when people were busy milling 3 with Dante and Shaddoll fusing into Construct. But for some strange reason, the OCG was very scared of this card. They had it banned until 2017, and when they finally did unban it, they errated it to require an Earth tuner. Now, it's not like this errata is keeping the card from seeing play, it would be bad regardless, but it just makes using it in retro formats more annoying. Sinister Serpent is a level 1 monster that adds itself from grave to hand during your standby phase, not once per return. So why did it get banned? Sinister Serpent is a very old promo card from 2003, and it would see play in most decks. You see, in old Yu-Gi-Oh, there were a lot of powerful cards that needed discards, and players gravitated towards any card that can make paying the cost easier. Cards like Thunder Dragon saw success solely for the reason it was a free discard. Sinister Serpent was used for the same purpose. It could be discarded every turn to allow you to never truly lose any advantage. It would be limited very quickly and stay that way for a few years before getting banned in 2005. It would stay banned for 10 years before getting limited in 2015 and unlimited later that year. So what happened? This card has aged horribly. Not only is discarding not a big deal anymore, in many cases it's an upside. However, Konami decided to errata the card anyway. Not only is it a hard once per turn, it's effectively a once every other turn, since if you use it 2 turns in a row, it banishes itself. This effect would have been bad in Edison, so there's no shot it will be played in 2015. BLS is a level 8 monster that can summon itself from hand by banishing a light and dark monster from grave. It can banish a monster your opponent controls, but it can't attack that turn, and if it destroys something by battle, it can attack again. So why did it get banned? BLS was released in 2004 alongside the rest of the Chaos monsters, and while it couldn't hold a candle to Emperor Dragon, it was without a doubt the second best card. It effectively had 2 forms of removal. You could just banish something, but you could also run 2 things over by battle, which wasn't hard to do with its insane 3000 attack. The double attack was also very good at finishing games. While you weren't likely gonna OTK, you could easily do tons of damage off of a guy you just summoned for free. It would be limited after only a month and banned later that year. It just did too much for 2005. It was stay banned for 6 years before getting limited in 2011, semi in 2017, and unlimited in 2018. So what happened? BLS being limited in 2011 was a huge deal. It was a bomb of a card and would often clean up any game it was summoned. It would continue to see regular play up until 2016. This is around the point BLS finally got power crept 12 years later. Decks started needing quick effects and OTKs weren't difficult to do anymore. While its status no longer good, it had one hell of a run. Lithosa Gem is a level 9 Earthworm that can destroy 2 monsters in your hand, including an Earth, to summon itself. And if both destroyed monsters were Earth, it can look at your opponent's extra deck and rip 3 cards with different names. So why did it get banned? The True Kings were released in 2017 and weren't really a deck. They were seemingly meant to be free agents for various attribute decks, but most of them never took off, except for Litho. Litho is the main True King in True King Dino, a powerful deck from 2017. Dino was a deck that loved popping babies. The only problem was that often the babies get stuck in your hand with no way to pop them. That's where Draconic Diagram came in. Diagram could pop a baby out of your hand to add a True King, and often the True King you added was Litho. If Litho was able to pop 2 babies, the game was frequently over, because not only would you get to summon 2 from deck, you would also get to rip apart your opponent's extra deck. Litho we banned after only 7 months, which is very fast, especially given the format. It would stay banned for 3 years before going to 1 in 2020 and 3 in 2023. So what happened? Litho's extra deck grip is still very strong. The issue is it's a 3-card combo just to summon it, and if you aren't popping Earths with destruction effects, it's super negative. Yeah, Scrap Raptor wouldn't trigger here. I just put it here because it's an Earth monster with a destruction effect. The card just takes too much investment for something Kashtira Unicorn can do for free. Makyura is a dark warrior that, when it's sent to grave from anywhere, allowed you to activate trap cards from your hand for the turn, as many as you wanted. So why did it get banned? Makyura was one of the most broken DM cards ever. On average, traps had stronger effects than spells, but were balanced around the fact they had to be set for a turn. Makyura completely broke this and led to some insane combos. If you ever heard about Chick the Yellow getting banned, 1, you were lied to, it was only ever semi-limited, and 2, it was because of Makyura. Chick the Yellow bounces a card if it deals damage, so if you have Makyura's effect live, Chick and grave, and call the haunted, you could call for Chick, Chick attack and bounce call, destroying Chick, and then repeat until the opponent lost. Makyura would actually be banned in the OCG due to a combo with Exchange of the Spirit like an FTK by milling your opponent's entire deck before their turn started. Makyura would be banned in 2005 in the TCG before Exchange was released, and it would be unbanned in 2020. So what happened? Makyura received a very harsh errata. Now it has to be sent to grave from field, and you only get 1 trap activation. I don't see the point of this errata. The card hasn't seen play and likely never will, so why even bother unbanning it? Rescue Cat is a level 4 beast that can send itself from field to grave to summon 2 level 3 or lower beasts from deck and destroy them in the end phase. Not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Rescue Cat was released in 2005 and surprisingly wouldn't see much success historically. That goat deck was a more recent creation. The first time this card would see major success was in Gladiator Beast as a way to cheat out Test Tiger and actually make proactive plays. Its next home would be in Dark Strike Fighter decks. This often involved Cat summoning 2 X-Saber or Bellum who not only hit for 3200, they ripped apart the opponent's hand, then could just be synced off into various things, but most often Strike Fighter who could easily burn for game. Cat's final home was an X-Saber. Dark Soul was a crazy card that got searched in the end phase, but was also a good non-tuner. This let Cat become a 1-card synchro for stuff like Brio and Goya and would be what got Cat banned in 2010. It would stay banned for 7 years before getting limited in 2017, then unlimited later that year. So what happened? Rescue Cat got an errata that honestly isn't that bad, and negates the monster summoned and is a hard once per turn. Cat saw play in Tri-Brigade as an additional normal summon and also as an extra beast to banish. It hasn't seen much play since, but it definitely isn't a bad card and could likely see play again. Disc Commander is a dark warrior that, when it's summoned from the graveyard, draws 2 cards, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Disc Commander was a promo card released in 2007, and it wouldn't take long to see play. If there's 2 things Yu-Gi-Oh players love, it's drawing cards and not once per turn effects, and this guy does both. It was easy to send this card to grave with stuff like Armageddon Knight and Dark Grepher, and once it was in grave, it turned all your revival effects into revival effects that were also Pot of Greed. It mainly saw play in Dark Armed Dragon decks with a large Destiny Hero package. This deck would use the Destiny Heroes as the dark engine to fuel deck. bad. Using Allure of Darkness, Destiny Draw, and Disc Commander, the deck had an insane amount of draw power, allowing it to easily set up for big lethal pushes with cards like Dimension Fusion in return from the different dimension. This would get the card banned in 2008. It would stay banned for 10 years before getting unlimited in 2018. So what happened? Disc Commander got an insane errata. Now the card not only can't be summoned the turn it's sent to grave, it's a once per duel effect now. I don't even think the original effect would be that broken in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Hero is bad for several reasons, and none of them are that they don't draw enough cards. And this card requires too many hoops to be used generically. Insane errata. Exciton Knight is a generic rank 4 requiring 2 4s. Once per chain, so not once per turn. As a quick effect, if your opponent has more total cards in their hand and field than you do, you can detach to destroy all other cards on field. Then your opponent takes no damage for the rest of the turn. So why did it get banned? Exciton Knight was released in 2014 and would completely change the game. There were strong board-breaking Xyz monsters, but none as strong as this. It punished players who overextended and gave players who were far behind a chance to get back into the game. It's basically a power crept version of Black Rose Dragon. It being a quick effect was also a huge deal because not only could you use the effect immediately, you could bank the second effect for later. Exciton will be banned in late 2015. This was a huge ban list that completely wiped out the meta, and Exciton was banned alongside it. It would stay banned for 3 years before being limited in 2018 and unlimited in 2019. So what happened? There's an argument Exciton never should have been banned in the first place, but Exciton was able to see play after its unbanning. Assuming you didn't get FDK'd, Exciton was decent against most decks, though it did struggle to play through negates, which led it to fall out of favor, especially once Zeus came out in 2020. Though it did manage to see play in Ryzeal as both a breaker and a light fiend for Fiendsmith, and Branded Dracotail is a great card for the mirror. Exchange of the Spirit is a normal trap that, if you have 15 cards in your graveyard, forces both players to swap their decks with their graveyards. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! Well, only if you lived in Japan. You see, in the TCG, this card was never anything more than a gimmick, since its supporting cards were either not out or already banned. It was released as a sneak peek card in 2005 and would actually be release limited. This is because the TCG and OCG shared a ban list at the time, and since the OCG got cards earlier, sometimes they would already be limited or even banned. And the OCG Exchange was released in 2001, it wouldn't take long to see play. The deck paired Exchange with Makyura the Destructor, who let you activate traps from your hand and hit the grave, to mill your opponent before their turn started. Since only you needed to have 15 cards in grave, the rest of the deck would just draw spells and cards that cycled themselves. The high roll combo could get 15 cards in grave, including Makyura, to FTK. But since the game was so slow, you could take a few turns to actually do the combo in OTK. This would get Makyura banned, but Exchange would still be playable with Temple of the Kings, which does basically the same thing. That would finally get Exchange banned in March 2006 in the OCG and April 2006 in the TCG. It would stay banned for 9 years before going to 1 in 2015 and unlimited later that year. So what happened? Exchange got an errata that it should have had to begin with. Now both players have to have 15 cards in grave. But by 2015, the card was unplayable. Maybe in another universe, this is how the card was printed and it saw play in old control decks, but alas. Super Rejuvenation is a quick play spell that draws a card for each dragon you discarded or tributed during the turn in the end phase, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Rejuve was released back in 2003 and wouldn't see much play. Yes, it could theoretically draw you an infinite amount of cards, but there just wasn't a deck that could consistently discard enough dragons to make the card worth it. That is until 2013. That was the release of the Dragon Rulers. They were a series of dragons that all had strong effects that require you to discard dragons, so it wasn't crazy to have Super Rejuvenation draw you 4 to 6 cards, which could then draw you into more Super Rejuvenations to draw you another 4 to 6 cards. And since the Dragon Rulers loved being in the grave, you were more than happy to discard them to hand size. The Dragon Rulers were already bordering on tier 0, but Super Rejuve just pushed it over the edge. Games were decided on who resolved it first. It was banned in 2013 and would stay banned for 6 years before getting unlimited in 2019. So what happened? Rejuve can still draw you tons of cards, and there are even better ways to discard a massive amount of dragons, but the fact you draw in the end phase completely kills it. Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force is a normal spell whose rank up effect is actually not relevant to it getting banned. The effect that is relevant is if a rank 5 or higher Xyz monster is summoned while it's in grave, it adds itself to hand once per duel. So why did it get banned? Argent Chaos Force was released in 2014 and, like most rank up spells, wouldn't be very good. That is until, wow, no way, 2018! Now at this time, Beatrice, a generic rank 6 who can dump any card, Utopic Zexal, an Xyz monster who can be ranked up over any Utopia by discarding a rank up spell and stops the opponent from activating card effects, and Electromite, the card that made Pendulum consistent, were all legal at the same time. The combo involved using Beatrice to send Argent Chaos Force, then ranking Beatrice up into Gaia Charger to trigger Chaos Force to add back, then just make Utopia, discard the Chaos Force, and boom, kinda FTK. The only deck to be able to do this consistently was Pendulum Magician thanks to the newly released Electromite. This deck wouldn't get Beatrice banned, it wouldn't get Utopic Zexal banned, it wouldn't get Electromite banned, no, it would get the rank up spell that was only ever discarded banned in 2018. It would stay banned for 3 years before coming to 3 in 2021. So what happened? Utopic Zexal got banned. That's what happened. The card did see play in 2024 with Gimmick Weapon FTK, so there's that. Snatch Steal is an equip spell that must be equipped to an opponent's monster, and when it is, it takes control of that monster. And during the opponent's standby phase, they gain 1,000 life points. So why did it get banned? Snatch Steal was released in 2002, and because the OCG and TCG shared a ban list, would be released limited. The card would obviously still be broken to see play in tons of decks. It had largely the same use as Change of Heart, but its steal being permanent meant it was better at stealing monsters with good effects, and it was also a much better tempo swing. But the fact it relied on an equip spell being on field meant it had counterplay that Change of Heart didn't, and because equips can't target face down monsters, it couldn't take flips. But stealing monsters in old Yu-Gi-Oh was so strong that Snatch Steal will be banned in 2006, 2006, randomly unbanned in 2007, rebanned 2 lists later where it would stay for 7 years before randomly being unbanned again in 2015. It was just as broken as last time, and we banned on the next list. It would stay banned for the next 8 years before going to 1 in 2024 and unlimited in 2026. So what happened? This type of effect just isn't as broken as it used to be. Stealing cards are way more matchup specific now. I have a feeling this card will be good one day, just not right now. Super Poly is a quick play spell that, for a discard, can perform a fusion summon using monsters from either player's field. Also, neither player can respond to the card. So why did it get banned? Super Poly was released all the way back in 2008, and it saw very little play. Despite the card being soul exchange on steroids, there weren't any generic fusion monsters to summon with it. This led the card to fall into relative obscurity for a while. That is until 2014 with Shaddoll. Shaddoll was the first good fusion deck to make use of semi-generic fusion monsters, all of them just taking a Shaddoll plus a monster of a specific attribute, with their best fusions requiring a light, dark, and earth respectively, which just so happened to line up very well against the best decks of the format. This let Shaddoll use Super Poly to turn any of their monsters plus any opponent's monster into one of their several boss monsters. This would get the card limited then banned in 2015. It would stay banned for 3 years before coming to 1 in 2018, 2 in 2019, and 3 later that year. So what happened? Super Poly is actually much stronger than when it was banned. Newer fusion monsters have gotten much more generic, so there are way more options to use now, some of which are seemingly made for it. Fun fact, Mud Dragon was released the set before Super Poly was unbanned. The inability to respond to it is frustrating, but nowadays, at least in my opinion, it's not much worse than getting your board Rageki'd. Temple of the Kings is a continuous spell that let you activate traps the turn they were set as long as it was on field. So why did it get banned? FTKs! Yeah! Temple of the Kings would be released in the OCG in 2001. It would see play for the same reason Makyura did. Activating traps the turn they were set is very strong. The best one was Exchange of the Spirit. Exchange can mill your opponent's entire deck before their first turn if, on the first turn of the duel, you had 15 cards to grave and could activate it on your own turn. This combo was pretty consistent due to all the draw spells legal at the time and would get both Makyura and Exchange of the Spirit banned. Temple of the Kings would get banned on the next list for some reason. This happened in 2006. However, at the time, this card was not yet released in the TCG. Up until 2013, the TCG and OCG shared a ban list, and since Temple was banned in the OCG, that meant when it finally did release in the TCG in 2010, it was already banned, and it would stay banned until 2015, which meant that the first time this card was playable in the TCG was in 2015, despite initially releasing in 2001. So what happened? This card got an errata. Now you can only activate one trap the turn it's set. This effectively killed the card and stopped it from seeing much play, though it has seen play in some Apoqlifort decks since they can search it, so that's neat. Future Fusion is a continuous spell that revealed a fusion monster from your extra deck, milled its fusion material, then summoned the monster 2 turns later. So why did it get banned? It was 5 foolish burials. Dragon decks would just reveal 5-headed dragon and dump 5 dragons with good graveyard effects. Machine decks could do it too. By revealing Chimera Tech over Dragon, you could mill Cyber Dragon and then every machine monster in your deck. The craziest part is, oftentimes you didn't even care about the fusion monster being summoned. Sure, it's nice to get a 5,000 attack monster, but the amount of advantage you accrued by milling your entire deck was so much it didn't matter. The card will be limited basically on release and banned in 2012, because it doesn't make any sense for this card and Foolish Burial to be treated the same on the ban list. It would stay banned for 5 years before going to 1 in 2017 and 3 in 2018. So what happened? This card got hit hard by an errata. Now you have to wait a turn before you get to send the monsters. And honestly, I think this version of the card still would have seen play back in the day. The card was a lot slower and it provided an extra turn for the opponent to do something. But by 2017, a card with this text had no chance of being good. The Morphing Jars are both flip monsters that mill, though they do it differently. Number 1 discards both players' hands and makes them draw 5 cards. And number 2 spins all monsters on field, forces both players to excavate cards equal to the amount shuffled, then any level 4 or lower monsters are summoned face down and everything else is milled. None of these are once per turn. So why did they get banned? The Jar series of monsters were historically very strong. They were all big disruption effects that seem to affect both sides but can easily be made to benefit you. If you just set your hand alongside number 1, your opponent has to remove it via card effect or empty their hand, or else you get a draw 5. For 2 was effectively just a board wipe that could also mill your opponent's big monsters. However, the strategy to make these cards hated was Empty Jar. The deck revolved around looping Morphing Jar number 1 to force your opponent to draw their entire deck and lose, and if they ever assembled a board, Cyber Jar would wipe it and mill more. But when Cyber Jar got banned, number 2 took its spot. This deck was never good. Forcing your opponent to draw their entire deck is going to let them find the out, but the deck was annoying enough at the local and regional level to get hit, banning the Morphing Jars in 2014. Number 1 would be limited in 2018 and unlimited in 2025, and number 2 would go straight to 3 in 2020. So what happened? The existence of Effect Veiler already made Empty Jar bad, but now that decks run more hand traps, the deck is unplayable. You have to play through every single hand trap in their deck since you're forcing them to draw them all. The Phantom Knights' Rank Up Magic launch is a quick play spell that can rank up a Dark Xyz monster with no material into another Dark Xyz monster that's 1 rank higher. So why did it get banned? This card came out in 2016 and didn't see much play in Phantom Knight. They had better things to be doing. However, after the release of their Broken Link monster in 2018, this card still wouldn't see much play. The main deck to play Rusty Bardiche, Dark Warrior, was busy summoning Rongo. However, once 2019 came around, things would be different. With the release of Time Thief Redoer, this card would finally have a home. Redoer's actual effect doesn't matter, all that does is that it's a generic dark rank 4 that can detach all material from itself, which meant it's the perfect target to be ranked up into none other than As a Thought, which stops your opponent from using monster effects for the turn. fun. As though that had been a problem before, but that was when you were summoning it on your own turn. Summoning it on the opponent's turn would basically skip it. Orcust would be the best deck to abuse this, since they could also rank up a spent Dingirsu into VFD to have an alternative floodgate. This would get the PK rank up spell banned in April 2019. It would stay banned for a little under a year before coming to 3 in 2020. So what happened? They banned Azathoth. You could still rank something up into VFD, but after Orcust got killed, that wouldn't be a big problem. This card still sees play in evil rogue decks like Raid Raptor, since it could rank up into Caliuga and skip your opponent's turn. Awesome. United We Stand is an equip spell that gives the equipped monster 800 attack for each monster you control. So why did it get banned? Equip spells are arguably the worst type of card throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Even in old Yu-Gi-Oh, most equip spells just didn't do anything. They were mid-conditional attack boosts that were destroyed with their equipped monster, and attack boosts have never been crazy strong. However, there is a big difference between a card giving 700 attack and 4000 attack. United We Stand was the biggest attack boost at the time, giving 4000 attack if you had all 5 zones filled. This led it to be paired with cards like Scapegoat for an insta 3500 attack monster, and Benkei, who could attack multiple times per equip spell. This combined with Mage Power, the slightly weaker spell version, could make for some very strong OTKs. This would get the card limited in 2003 and banned on the first ever ban list in 2004. The same one that banned Emperor Dragon, Raigeki, and Imperial Order also banned a gimmicky OTK tool. It would stay banned for over a year before going to 1 in 2005. It would remain limited for 5 years before going to 2, then 3 in 2010. It's semi-limited in Edison, by the way. So what happened? I do a poll every week to pick what card to do next, and the fact that I got several comments being surprised this thing was ever banned should tell you all you need to know. Eva's a level 1 light fairy that, when it's sent to grave, can banish up to 2 other light fairies to add the same number of them from deck to hand. So why did it get banned? Eva was released in 2018 and saw very little play. It was intended to be used with the various Herald's colors, but since they only saw sparse play, Eva did too. Until 2021. Drytron was a very powerful combo deck that was able to abuse the design mistakes that were Cyber Angel Ben 10 and Beatrice. Ben 10 had a non-once return search for a light fairy when tributed, and she was a 6, so she could be half of a Beatrice, who could send any card from deck to grave as a quick effect. The end goal of this deck was to summon Herald of Ultimateness. Ultimateness was not only an Omni, it also negated summons, and also it wasn't once per turn or even once per chain. The only catch is that you have to discard a fairy to use the negate. With Eva, however, this was very easy. If you already had Eva in hand, you could just discard it to add 2 more fairies, letting your 1 negate equal 3, or if you didn't have Eva, you could dump it with Beatrice to get 2 extra fairies that way. It would be limited at the end of 2021, and while most lists played 2, you only needed 1, and it would be banned at the start of 2022. It would stay banned for 2 years before going to 1, then 2 in 2024, and 3 in 2025. So what happened? Drytron not only has better things to be doing than making Ultimateness, they're completely outclassed in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And no other deck really wants to play Eva. It's not that its effect is slow, it's just way too specific. Both of them are normal spells that destroy all your opponent's monsters on field. Darkhold just also destroys yours too. Neither are once per turn. So why'd they get banned? Both of these cards were released in Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever set back in 2002, and they would be some of the strongest spells in the set. Since early Yu-Gi-Oh! Was mostly just comparing monsters' attack stats, having removal was very strong. Using Raigeki to destroy your opponent's entire field was insanely broken because it was useful when you were ahead to push through damage and when you were behind to clear the board. Darkhold was still great, but only useful when you're behind. They were so broken they would both be limited on the first ever limited list only 2 months after release. They would stay limited for a few years before being banned on the first ever ban list in 2004. Darkhold will be unbanned in 2005 just to get rebanned a few months later, and in 2010 it will be tested again. This time it stuck around, going to 2 in 2015, randomly going back to 1 in 2017, then 3 in 2019. Raigeki would stay banned until 2014, where it would be limited. It would stay there for another 8 years before going to 3 in 2022. So what happened? These cards have aged very well. While they were a bit strong back when they were initially unbanned, nowadays they fit right in. Decks are able to resist destruction now via being immune to it or having floating effects to minimize the damage. This means that a single Darkhold or Raigeki is unlikely to fully wipe out the opponent's board, but it usually will do something. Their main benefit over modern board breakers is that they aren't once per turn and have no restrictions on them, which has led them to see play in side decks as recently as 2025. Darkhold also has the benefit of removing floodgate monsters from your field. Crush Card Virus is a normal trap that can tribute a dark monster you control with 1000 or less attack. Then destroy all monsters your opponent currently controls, all monsters in their hand, and all monsters they draw for the next 3 turns with 1500 or more attack. So why'd it get banned? Crush Card Virus was initially released as a prize card in 2007, which meant you had to win an SJC to actually get one. This meant that the card would only be owned by top players and the uber rich. And this card was insane. If it was activated against you, you most likely just lost on the spot, due to losing your field, hand, and your next 3 draws. Which led to players who had won tournaments, or ones with friends in high places, having an advantage over every other player because they had access to this card. Now, it would be limited almost immediately and would stay that way for 2 years. It would eventually get an accessible reprint in 2008 and continue to be broken before being banned in 2009. It would stay banned for 6 years before going to 1 in 2015 and 3 in 2016. So what happened? This might be it, the worst errata in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Most of the time they retain the same effect but have a much harsher restriction, but in this case they completely changed the card. You still tribute and it still blows up their field and hand, but now they don't take damage for 3 turns and they get to destroy up to 3 monsters in their deck with 1500 or more attack. This is actively bad for several reasons. While yes, blowing up their hand is good, they have 3 turns to just chill because they take no damage, and you also let them send 3 monsters from deck to grave, and because they get destroyed and not sent, it triggers even more effects than something like Foolish Burial would. In its initial form, I don't think the card would still be banned. It would certainly be toxic like the other virus cards, but none of those cards are good. Zodiac Dryden is a rank 4 that technically takes 4/4s as material, but once per turn can be ranked up over any Zodiac, so you almost always did that. And as a quick effect, you can detach to pop a card. And Barrage is a continuous spell that pops a card you control to summon a Zodiac from the deck, and if it's destroyed, it can attach itself to a Zodiac Xyz. So why'd they get banned? Zodiac was released in 2017, would immediately become the strongest deck of the format. The deck is full of Link 1s pretending to be rank 4s, and this allowed them to be spammed out effortlessly. Quick effect disruption at this point was still either through multi-card combos or traps, so Dryden just being able to pop anything was crazy strong. This led to Zodiac technically being the most represented tier 0 deck ever because it comboed well with tons of decks, and that was because Barrage could summon Rat from the deck, and one Rat could make a Dryden plus a rank 4 by itself. This would ultimately get Dryden banned at the end of 2017. It would stay banned until 2020 when Konami unbanned Dryden and limited Barrage. This was all well and good until the release of Zeus. Zeus can be ranked up over an Xyz monster once one is battled, and can attach 2 materials to wipe the board as a quick effect and not once per turn. Zodiac could easily make a 6 material Zeus thanks to Dryden, who is the 6th material. This would prove too strong and get both Dryden and Barrage banned in 2021. In 2024, Barrage will be limited, and in 2025, both cards would go to 3. So what happened? Zodiac was power crept by 2022, yet the card stayed banned forever. I don't see these cards ever seeing much play unless Broad Bolt gets let out, but I doubt that'll ever happen. Briodac is a generic level 6 synchro that let you discard any amount of cards to bounce the same number of cards, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Briodac was released very early on, back in 2009, and it alongside Goyo Guardian became the gold standard for level 6 synchros thanks to its versatile effect. Obviously, you could bounce your opponent's cards to use it as removal, but you could also use it to bounce your own cards and potentially re-trigger their effects. And because you could just keep bouncing one card at a time, you could loop stuff for a while. This would get the card limited relatively quickly, and it would stay at 1 for 2 years before being banned in 2011. This was for a couple reasons. One, it was an incredibly strong generic 6 that overshadowed everything else, especially since Goyo Guardian was banned at the time, and it was only a month before the release of Mermail Atlantean. Basically, they have effects when discarded by water monsters, and Brio being able to consistently discard them throughout the turn would have been busted. It would stay banned for 5 years before going to 1 in 2017, 2 in 2018, and 3 in 2019. So what happened? Brio received an errata not only making it a hard once per turn, it can also no longer target your own cards. By 2017, this type of effect was too slow, so to no one's surprise, it saw no play. With its original effect, the card likely would still be banned since there's probably some dumb combo you could do. But why even bother with the errata? Cyberjar is a flip monster that, on flip, destroys all monsters on field. Then both players reveal the top 5 cards of their deck, summon all level 4 or lower monsters among them, either face up or face down, and the rest are added to hand. So why did it get banned? Cyberjar was released all the way back in 2002 and would immediately see play. The Empty Jar deck was the only remotely successful mill deck in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. The goal of the deck was to loot Morphing Jar to slowly make your opponent draw all their cards. Cyberjar was included because not only was it a board wipe, it got the opponent 5 cards deeper in their deck, and it could even hit another copy of itself with its own effect to get another 5 cards. That interaction would get the card limited within a month, and that's where it would stay for a while. Empty Jar would never be meta, but like Burn, somehow kept seeing play. And this was a very annoying deck to play against, which led to Konami banning Cyberjar in 2006. It would stay banned for 16 years before going to 1 in 2022 and finally going to 3 in 2025. So what happened? This card was banned for way too long. Most times when a card is banned for too long, it's by like a year, but this card could have come back in 2016 and been bad. Flip monsters have been power kept for over 10 years at this point. Grand Soil is a level 8 Earth that can only be summoned from hand by having exactly 5 Earths in grave. On summon, it reborns a monster from either grave. Neither its summon or reborn are once per turn. So why did it get banned? FTKs, yeah! The Elemental Lords were a series of monsters for all 6 main attributes. They each had an effect reminiscent of a banned card at the time, and Grand Soils was Monster Reborn. In the past, this card would be used alongside Duloran to loop Chronomaly Atlantis before burning with Cowboy for game. However, this wouldn't get Grand Soil banned as it would stick around for another several years. The deck, or more accurately, the card to do it in, would be none other than Firewall Dragon. On release, Firewall had a non-once per turn effect to add monsters back from grave. This, combined with other broken cards like Beatrice, Brilliant Fusion, and Snow, allowed for a very consistent FTK by looping Gaga Cowboy. There would also be hand lips using Enter Blath in year 2. This would get Grand Soil banned in 2017, the first of Firewall's casualties. It would stay banned for a year before coming back in 2018. So what happened? They errata the card to only be able to reborn once per turn. The card never saw normal play before, and it still hasn't to this day. Tsukiyomi is a level 4 spirit monster that, on summon, sets a monster. It then has the normal spirit monster effects, like needing to be normal summoned and bouncing in the end phase. So why did it get banned? Tsukiyomi is a classic Yu-Gi-Oh card released in 2003, and initially it wasn't that great. This card had tons of applications, like flipping down your opponent's monster to easily run it over or turn off their continuous effects, or flipping your own flip monster to be able to re-trigger its effect, and because Tsukiyomi bounced itself back every turn, not only could you keep using its effect every turn, it made removing it very hard. However, at the time of its release, the meta was just not suited for it. Magical Scientist FDK was rampant, hand control completely ruined this card, and Invasion of Chaos was released only a few months later. All these factors led to Tsukiyomi not seeing much play until 2005. Now that the game has slowed down and control decks became the meta, Tsukiyomi felt right at home. It would quickly be limited but still see play, before being banned in 2006. It was stay banned for 6 years before being limited in 2012 and unlimited in 2013. So what happened? Book of Moon on a normal summon wasn't broken anymore. Flip monster had been bad for a while now, so its sole purpose now was to flip opponents' monsters, which wasn't worth a normal summon in 2012. Dynamo Dynamite Knight is a level 6 monster that can be tribute summoned by using continuous spells and traps, and places a True Draco or True King continuous trap from deck when the opponent activates a card effect. So why did it get banned? The True Draco archetype is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most infamous decks. The deck was released in 2017 right after one of the best decks of all time, Zodiac, and the fact that True Draco was able to make a name for itself during a tier 0 format really shows how busted this deck was. True Draco was a deck that would tribute summon 1 or 2 guys a turn, then accrue advantage while your opponent played through your setup. Of the deck's 3 main names, Dynamite Knight was by far the best. Both True Draco traps helped immensely with keeping Masterpiece alive and also keeping you alive. They also let you tribute summon on the opponent's turn and pop a monster when they're sent to grave. The deck's major success came from the pure variant that was able to play broken cards like Card of Demise and Monarch's Erupts, and a hybrid variant alongside Zodiac. The deck would remain at full power until the start of Master Rule 4. Since early Link monsters were very bad, many players opted to just forego the extra deck and play True Draco Stun. This got Dynamite Knight banned only 4 months after release. It would stay banned for a year before going to 1 in 2018 and 3 in 2022. So what happened? True Draco is just a mid-stun deck nowadays. Their interrupters are almost 10 years old, and the deck only does anything if they draw their Broken Floodgate. Magician of Faith is a flip monster that, on flip, adds a spell from your grave to your hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? In old Yu-Gi-Oh, spell cards were by far the strongest type of card in the game, due to them having the most game-changing effects. This led to most of the good ones being limited to 1, and this made Magician of Faith's ability to recycle them insanely broken. This card let you get additional activations of Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, Regeki, Darkhold, Change of Heart, any of the hand rips, or really any spell in your deck. As you could imagine, Magician of Faith saw tons of play in pretty much every deck since they all stood to gain from multiple Pot of Greeds. Moth would outlive most of the spells it recycled before being limited in 2004. It would be weaned off the list, going to 2 in 2006 before going back to 1 on the next list. It would stay at 1 for another year before being banned in 2007, but it wouldn't last long because 2 lists later it would be limited to 1 for a year before being banned a second time in 2008. While its targets changed, the ability to double up on power spells was still busted. It would stay banned for 6 years before being unbanned in 2014. So what happened? Flip monsters are way too slow in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Even back in 2014 when it was unbanned, players were busy summoning Construct and Dante. They didn't have time to set a flip monster and wait a turn. And don't even think about it nowadays. Masterpiece is a level 8 worm that can be tribute summoned by using continuous spells and traps. It is unaffected by the card types used for its tribute summon, and as a quick effect can banish a continuous spell and trap from grave to pop a card. So why did it get banned? Masterpiece was released alongside the rest of the True Draco archetype in 2017, and this archetype would see success as both a pure strategy thanks to a bunch of floodgates, or as a hybrid deck alongside Zodiac. The pure deck aimed to summon Masterpiece and just sit on it. Monster immune beat rank 4s, trap immune beat Paleo, and spell immune beat everything else. While you couldn't get all 3, monster spell was usually enough, especially when it's backed up by a floodgate or Dryden. Once Master Rule 4 began and put heavy restrictions on the extra deck, True Draco would surge in popularity since they got to completely ignore it. This would get the deck hit on the first list of Master Rule 4. The deck would persevere and continue seeing play into 2018, where Konami would ban Masterpiece. It was hard enough to out Masterpiece by itself, but when it's backed up by multiple floodgates, it was unbearable. Masterpiece would stay banned for 7 years before being unbanned in 2025. So what happened? Masterpiece is one of the easiest towers to out in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It only has 2950 attack, so without Apocalypse, it gets run over by any modern boss monster. Underworld Goddess exists, and even if the opponent can't out it immediately, it doesn't put up much pressure. The only thing the deck does now is sit on broken floodgates. Spore is a level 1 plant tuner that can reborn itself from grave by banishing another plant, then increases its level by the banished monster's level. The effect is once per duel. So why did it get banned? Spore was a part of the plant synchro decks that were playable around 2011. These decks often used Reborn Tengu alongside Spore and Glow Up Bulb to climb into multiple big synchros. And these decks were powerful in 2011, but this card was banned in 2012. The 2012 format was dominated by Inzektor, a combo deck that could break boards like it was nothing, Dino Rabbit, a deck that put up multiple negates backed up by a floodgate, and Wind Up, a combo deck that aimed to hand loop. These 3 decks created a historically bad format and really soured the introduction of Xyz monsters, which was made even worse by the next ban list. Konami decided to ban Spore, Bulb, and Trishula and limit TG Striker and Earth. Now, the ban list has always been a means to sell product, but this was arguably the most blatant it's ever been. They hit every remaining synchro deck without touching any of the Xyz decks. Now, on the very next list, they would correct this and significantly hit all 3 of the aforementioned decks and unban Spore. So what happened? Spore never needed to be banned, which is why it was only gone for a single list. Chaos Sorcerer is a level 6 monster that can only be summoned from your hand by banishing a light and dark from grave. It has a soft once per turn effect to banish the monster, but it can't attack that turn. So why did it get banned? Chaos Sorcerer was released in 2004 alongside some of the strongest cards Yu-Gi-Oh! Had ever seen, and it was able to play right alongside them. Chaos decks revolved around getting as many lights and darks into the grave as fast as possible so that you could spam out your 3 main bosses: Chaos Emperor Dragon, who ended the game on summon, Blacklist a Soldier, who also would likely end the game, and Chaos Sorcerer, who was just there. It was just a strong, efficient card. It came out for basically free, could banish things when it stopped your opponent from getting resources in grave, and it was a decently big body itself. It wasn't a flashy effect like its peers, it just did its job and did it well. It would see consistent play in Chaos decks for the next 2 years until it was banned in 2006. The list hit a ton of DM staples, so it's no surprise that Sorc got hit too. It was debuted stay banned for 3 years before going to 1 and then 2 in 2009, then back to 1, then back up to 2 in 2010, 3 in 2011, then 1 in 2012, 2 in 2014, then finally 3 for real now in 2015. So what happened? Chaos Stork was playable that whole time it was ping-ponging around the list. Any deck that could consistently summon it loved to play it, but a non-quick effect banish hasn't been strong in a decade. Change of Heart is a normal spell that takes control of an opponent's monster for a turn, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Change of Heart was released in 2002, would immediately be one of the best spells in the game. It could do so many things. Steal an opponent's monster to tribute it off, steal a flip monster to steal its effect, or just take a monster to swing for game. This power would get the card limited almost immediately, and it would stay that way for a while. At 1, it was still a very strong tempo swing, and this would eventually get the card banned in 2005. It would stay banned for 17 years, all while cards like Brain Control and Mind Control, two much weaker versions of this card, would get hit in their own right. The real deal would come back in 2022. The card would be put to 1, it would stay that way for 40 years before going to 3 in 2026. So what happened? Stealing effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are probably the weakest they've ever been. Decks tend to end on multiple important monsters and have some layered forms of interruption, which inherently makes them less susceptible to stealing effects, and the fact that it targets means that a lot of decks can actually dodge it. The last time these cards saw mainstream use was during Kashtira format. Since that deck ended on one big monster with no protection, it was very weak to being stolen then turned into a Zeus. There will probably be a time when stealing effects will be good again, but that time isn't now. Dragonbuster Destruction Sword has the relevant effect to lock the opponent out of their extra deck as long as it's equipped to a monster. Fun. So why did it get banned? Dragonbuster was released in 2016 as part of the Buster Blader support that aimed to turn the iconic DM monster into an archetype. While it would take a few additional ways to get there, this deck would be an off-and-on rogue pick in several formats due to its powerful floodgate effects. However, once 2020 rolled around and released Union Carrier, this card would no longer be known for its silly rogue deck. Union Carrier is a pretty much generic Link 2 that can equip a monster from your deck to a monster you control with the same type or attribute, and since Dragonbuster was a dark dragon, it could very easily be equipped to tons of different Envoy pieces at the time, most notably Borreload Savage Dragon. And because Dragonbuster doesn't need to be equipped to a Buster Blader, this would lock the opponent out of their extra deck, on top of being attached to an Omni Negate. This got Dragonbuster banned in 2020, it would stay banned for one list before being unlimited in 2021 when they banned Union Carrier. So what happened? This card was never the problem. It's a ridiculous floodgate that I don't think ever should have been printed, but Union Carrier was by far the bigger problem. And since being unlimited, it hasn't seen any play outside its own deck. Brain Control is a normal spell that, for the cost of 800 life points, takes control of a face-up monster for a turn, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Brain Control was released in 2005 and would be the 4th stealing card, and its selling point was that it wasn't as strong as Change of Heart or Snatch Steal, which meant it wasn't banned. Ironic. Brain Control is basically Change of Heart, but you pay 800 life and can only take face-up monsters, which was relevant since stealing flip monsters was one of the best things Change of Heart could do. So Brain Control would only be used as effectively soul exchange or some extra damage. However, once Synchros came out, it got much better. Now not only could you steal your opponent's Synchro, you could steal their monsters to turn them into your own Synchros. This made the card very swingy and allowed for bigger swing turns that Konami wanted, so they banned it in 2010. It was stay banned for 7 years before being limited in 2017, semi later that year, and unlimited in 2018. So what happened? Brain Control's errata is famously bad. The effect is still the same, but you can only target monsters that can be normal summoned, so no extra deck monsters. This completely killed the card and it saw zero play ever since it's unbanned. At least nowadays, the card would be bad regardless of the errata, since both Change of Heart and Snatch Steal are both at 3. The Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche is a Link 3 that takes 2+ Darks as material. It has the relevant effect to dump a The Phantom Knights monster from deck for cost. Yeah, it actually sends for effect, not cost. I just misread the colon as a semicolon. It doesn't make a difference for the analysis, but I feel like I'd get comments if I didn't bring it up. Also, I say it again, so ignore it the second time. To set a Phantom Knight spell trap from deck. Also, it cannot be used as Link material. So why did it get banned? Bardiche was released in 2018, would immediately see play in Dark Warrior. The deck could summon it very easily, it could set Shade Brigandine for an extra body, or Fogblade for another interruption. And the best part, since it dumped a Phantom Knight for cost, you would get to trigger its graveyard effect to ++ while setting from the deck. However, after Rongo's ban, this card would take a break until the release of Orcust. Orcust did use this card to set Shade Briggs and Fogblades, but the dangerous part was that it could set the Phantom Knight's rank up spell. It could rank up a Dark Exceeds with no material into one rank higher. Usually you would rank up Time Thief Redoer into Azathoth to skip your opponent's turn. This would get the rank up spell banned, but Bardiche would only stick around for one more list. Its ability to print advantage was just too strong and would get it banned in 2019. It would stay banned for a year and come back in 2020. So what happened? The game sped up. Unless you were playing a big Phantom Knight deck, it wasn't worth it to play a Link 3 that required a minimum 2 cards in a deck to function. And as the Phantom Knight's deck got power crept, so did Bardiche. Call of the Haunted is a continuous trap that summons a monster from your graveyard. Then if the monster is destroyed or a call leaves the field, the other is destroyed, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Call of the Haunted is a very old card released in 2002, and it would immediately become a meta staple. Monster Reborn was limited because the ability to resurrect monsters in old Yu-Gi-Oh was broken, so another card that can do just that was insane. While it was more limited, you could only summon your own monster, and it made the monster die to back row removal. It being a trap gave it a bunch of other uses. It could resummon a monster in the battle phase to keep you alive, you could reborn a recruiter to ram it again, you could even bring back Jinzo who could negate Call's downside. This led the card to get limited after only a month, where it would stay for 6 years before being banned in 2008. Its ability to summon anything at quick effect speed had simply gotten too strong. It would stay banned for a year before coming back to 1 in 2009, it would then go to 2 in 2011 and 3 in 2013. So what happened? Call of the Haunted has been well and truly power crept. Trap Arrival is generally too slow in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And has been for almost 10 years. At least it has a neat deck that can play it. Dragon Ravine is a field spell that has the relevant effect to discard then dump any dragon as a soft once per turn. So why did it get banned? Dragon Ravine was released in 2011 and despite being made for the Dragoonity deck would see play in most dragon decks. Foolish Burial was limited at this point, so having more ways to mill dragons every turn was super good. However, it wouldn't be a problem until the Dragon Rulers came out. The Dragon Rulers all can summon themselves from grave by banishing dragons from grave, so Dragon Ravine got to send 2 rulers to grave with each effect, since discarding one was hardly a cost. This would get the card banned in 2014, on the second round of hits to the Dragon Rulers. It would stay banned for a year before being unbanned in 2015 and unlimited in 2017. So what happened? This card is by no means bad. It's seen play several times since its unbanning. For a while it was one of the best ways to get Destrudo into the grave and would see play in tons of combo decks. Its other notable use was in Dragon Link. After the release of Romulus, Dragon Link had a way to dump Abstrator off a Link too. While nowadays it's often being cut, the card did have a crazy long run. Double Iris Magician is a level 4 pendulum monster with a scale effect to make a dark spellcaster you control deal double damage for a turn, then pop itself, and a monster effect where, if it's destroyed, adds a pendulum graph from deck to hand, not once per turn. So why did it get banned? Pendulum Magician was a deck that really beat the odds. After the Master Rule changes that were meant to cripple pendulum decks went into effect, this deck managed to compete with Spiral, a tier 0 deck at the time. That was because despite the fact you couldn't pen summon your extra deck every turn, they could still put up a formidable board for 2018 standards, and a key part of this end board was Time Pendulum Graph, and Double Iris Magician was what got you access to this card. It could be popped in a multitude of different ways, and since it wasn't once per turn, could get you a ton of advantage. Pen Magician will be a top deck for several months before getting Double Iris Magician banned in 2018. Double Iris would stay banned for 2 years before being unbanned in 2020 and unlimited in 2021. So what happened? The ban on Double Iris was seemingly a preemptive hit in hindsight. Electromite was released shortly after and would propel the deck to being one of the best FTK decks of all time. Once Double Iris came off the list, Pendulum was too far gone for it to do anything.